On May 22, 2013, the Harok family was going about their day in a quiet Czech village, completely unaware that their lives were about to be violently ripped away. A man with a dark past and an even darker future walked into their home and left behind a trail of death. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was too late. The family was gone, for lives cut short in an instant. As authorities began to piece together the horror, the perpetrator was already on the run, desperate to escape the consequences of his actions. He had no enemies, no obvious motive, but that didn't stop him. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the Harok family massacre and how it became the most chilling crime the Czech Republic had ever seen. Veronika Harok, the mother, was a respected teacher at Brno grammar school who taught Czech and history. On top of that, she was a student counselor. At home, she was a loving wife and mother, keeping her family grounded and connected. Martin Harok, her husband, was an entrepreneur with a seemingly stable career. He was also a family man with 2 kids, Philip and David, and even found time to be part of a local ukulele orchestra. Martin always found joy in the little things, especially when he got to share them with his son, Philip. Philip was doing everything right. He was a university student at Massacre University, studying hard and building a future for himself. He was a good guy, active in the ukulele orchestra with his dad, and had a girlfriend. He seemed set to have the perfect life. The youngest, David, was just 16 and a talented soccer player with a bright future. He was full of energy, always ready to take on the world, and had everything ahead of him. Before the family's lives were lost, Kevin Dahlgren, Veronika's cousin from the US, had arrived in the Czech Republic for a visit. His background was pretty standard, or at least that's what everyone thought. Born in 1983 in Sacramento, California, his family had ties to the Harok family going back decades. But the reunion, which was supposed to be a warm family gathering, took a dark turn that no one saw coming. His stay in Brno was supposed to last 3 weeks, but he had other plans. His arrival in early May 2013 was rushed. He had a ticket to Vienna but no real plan and barely any ability to communicate in Czech. Things were already off, and no one could have known just how far he'd spiral into madness. What started as an ordinary day of work, study, and family time quickly turned into something nobody could have foreseen. Dahlgren wasn't just a guest in their home. He was the person who would change the Harok family's fate forever. Before Kevin Dahlgren ever set foot in Brno, he already had a past filled with red flags that would soon surface in the most horrifying way possible. Dahlgren's life story wasn't what you'd call normal. May 22nd would be the culmination of a messy web of problematic family history, personal issues, and poor choices. Dahlgren's family history was nothing if not complicated. His grandparents had fled Czechoslovakia, escaping the communist regime in 1949. They eventually settled in the US, but the family's ties to the Czech Republic didn't die. After the Velvet Revolution in 1990, the Harok family and Dahlgren's family started reconnecting. It all seemed like a typical family reunion, until you dig a little deeper. Growing up, Dahlgren wasn't your average kid. Undiagnosed mental health issues had gone untreated, leaving him fighting his demons and emotions. He was known for having anger management problems, which often manifested as violent outbursts that drove people away. At one point, he thought joining the military would solve everything, but it didn't. He was expelled from military school, a clear sign that his issues weren't just a phase. By the time he decided to visit the Harok family in May 2013, things had only gotten worse. He reached out to them when he already had a ticket to Vienna and announced that he would be arriving soon. He didn't speak a word of Czech and had no clear plans, but somehow, the Harok family agreed to pick him up from the airport. They didn't know it yet, but this would be the worst decision of their lives. When Dahlgren arrived in Brno on May 2, 2013, something was off from the start. His psychological issues weren't something he could hide for long. As the days went by, Dahlgren started sending strange messages and making erratic decisions. He was unhinged, but the family had no idea how much worse it would get. By the time May 22nd came around, Dahlgren's dark side was ready to surface. The morning of May 22nd seemed just like any other for the Harok family. Nothing hinted at what was about to happen. It was a day that would change everything, but no one could have predicted how quickly events would unfold. Before the police caught on, at 6:40 a.m., the first sign that something wasn't right had already passed. Veronika called in sick, even though she rarely missed class at her local school. She claimed to have a headache. She said it wasn't too alarming at first, but when you look back, it feels like the first domino had already fallen. She cancelled her Czech and history classes for the day. Martin was at home too, a 55-year-old entrepreneur with a stable life, a successful business, and a happy family. Everything you'd expect. But none of that mattered as he killed Martin with multiple stab and slash wounds, some made with an axe. Philip, the older son, was also home and was murdered while lying in his bed with multiple stab and slash wounds to the head and neck. Things had gone from ordinary to horrific by 8 a.m. Dahlgren was a guest in their home, and he changed everything with a knife he brought with him from the U.S., the same knife he used on the Harok family. Police later found that most of the fatal wounds were to the head and neck. This was his tipping point. His mental state had shattered, and there was no going back. Veronica's wristwatch stopped ticking at 8:33 a.m. when she was murdered by 29 stab wounds, a stab to the neck, and a fatal blow to her brain that ended her life in that exact moment. And just like that, a wife, a mother, and a teacher were gone. Dahlgren's next move was to carry on as if nothing had happened. At 9 a.m., he answered the doorbell when the postal delivery man arrived and took the mail as if nothing had happened. By 10:30 a.m., he'd cancelled a tutoring session. Nothing seemed out of place. At 11 a.m., he turned away the family's cleaner, asking her to come back another day. It wasn't a strange request on its own, but in the context of everything else, it felt unsettling. Still, no one thought to call it in to check what was happening inside the house. Dahlgren was calm through it all. Around 12:30 p.m., David arrived home, unaware of the horror awaiting him. He was only 16 at the time and expecting to spend a normal day with his family. But he never got that chance. Dahlgren attacked him with the same force as the rest of the family, stabbing him 6 times and smashing a rock against his head, ultimately killing him with a cut to his throat. Dahlgren simply left for the airport after David's murder, and he was still calm. He sent a text to a family friend at 3:14 p.m., saying the Harok family had left for Vienna and that he planned to follow them. Then he took a taxi to the airport and boarded a flight to Washington, D.C. The entire family was gone, and Dahlgren was on his way to get back to his life as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until later that evening, around 10 p.m., when neighbors noticed smoke coming out from the Harok family's garage. They thought it was just a small fire, but it wasn't. Dahlgren had lit the house on fire to cover his tracks. When the officers on the scene looked closer, they found burned bodies under a blanket. Those were the bodies of Veronica, Martin, and Philip. David's body was upstairs, a family wiped out in one horrific day. Authorities began their investigation the next morning, but by then, Dahlgren was already long gone. By the time Dahlgren finished his killing spree, he wasn't hanging around to face the music. The Harok family was dead, and his work was done. Dahlgren's next task was getting out of the country, and fast. What followed was a series of calculated moves that showed just how cold he truly was. Dahlgren wasn't rattled, even as he messaged a friend at 3:14 p.m., claiming the Harok family had already left for Vienna and that he would be joining them soon. It was a quick, calculated lie, a way to cover his tracks and make it seem like nothing was wrong. At that point, authorities still had no clue what had actually happened inside the house, and Dahlgren knew he had a small window to get out before things got serious. By 5 p.m., he was already 140 kilometers away in Vienna, standing at the international airport. It's easy to overlook, but the choice of Vienna wasn't random. It was a smart move that gave him access to international flights. This meant he could get out of Europe and into the world before anyone had a chance to catch up. He was already planning his escape, and the Czech authorities were the last thing on his mind. At 10:46 p.m., Dahlgren boarded a flight to Washington, D.C., in an attempt to disappear. He figured the farther he got from the Czech Republic, the more time he'd buy himself. Inside his luggage was direct evidence of his crime, a pair of blood-spattered shorts. But he wasn't worried about what he'd left behind. By that point, he was just focused on getting to the U.S. As the flight cruised over the UK the next day, things had changed because the police had caught on. The Czech authorities knew Dahlgren had fled, so they issued an international arrest warrant. A warning was sent to the flight crew at 1 p.m., but the plane was already in international airspace by then, so the crew kept flying. Their flight was the last leg of Dahlgren's freedom. The authorities were tracking him now. It was just a matter of time before they caught up. When the plane landed at Washington Dulles International Airport on the afternoon of May 23rd, Dew Green thought he'd made it. He was convinced he had outrun what he had done. But the U.S. wasn't a safe haven. U.S. Customs and Border Protection had already been tipped off by the Czech police, who were waiting for him at the airport. As soon as the plane touched down, Dew Green was arrested at the gate. The blood-stained shorts in his luggage were enough evidence for the authorities to arrest him, and DNA tests confirmed the blood was from the Harok family. This was the final nail in the coffin that would get him life in prison. His escape plan fell apart before it could even get started, but Dew Green stuck to his story. Even as he was taken into custody, he claimed he'd found the bodies of the Harok family after going for a jog, saying he fled in fear for his life. But it didn't hold up. His story was full of holes, and the blood on his clothes didn't help his case. The investigation was just beginning, but the authorities already had their man. Dew Green's capture was a turning point, but it also proved just how far he'd gone to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. He fled the scene with the goal of getting out of the country as fast as possible while the Harok family's bodies lay in their home, hidden under blankets in the garage. But Dew Green wasn't thinking about them. Taking a taxi to Vienna International Airport after carrying out the murders, Dew Green boarded a flight that would eventually take him back to the U.S. But his escape wasn't as smooth as he'd hoped. The timing of his flight raised serious suspicion. As soon as the authorities in the Czech Republic started piecing things together, they realized Dew Green had already fled the scene, leaving everyone scrambling to catch up. Dew Green's decision to fly to Vienna seemed like a quick, calculated move to put as much distance as possible between himself and the crime, but it wasn't a foolproof escape. While he was thousands of miles away, the Czech authorities weren't about to let him get away that easily. Law enforcement in both the Czech Republic and the U.S. knew they had to move fast if they wanted to stop him from disappearing forever. When Dew Green finally landed at Washington Dulles International Airport, he thought he was in the clear. But as soon as he disembarked, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers were waiting for him. The moment he stepped off the plane, they arrested him for the 4 murders. His plan to run and hide had completely backfired. Even with all the evidence stacked against him, Dew Green stuck to his story. In a bizarre attempt to distance himself from the murders, he claimed he had found the bodies after their deaths and, terrified, decided to flee. He insisted he wasn't the killer, just some innocent guy trying to escape a situation gone horribly wrong. Of course, that explanation didn't fly with law enforcement. It didn't make sense that someone would be so terrified by discovering dead bodies that they'd immediately flee the country. His behavior before and after the murders, canceling appointments, sending odd messages, and showing no real signs of distress, painted a different picture. Everything pointed to Dew Green as the killer. His actions, combined with the forensic evidence, showed he'd not only committed the murders but had planned his escape afterward. Dew Green's story fell apart, and it didn't take long for the authorities to see him for what he was, a liar. Once Kevin Dahlgren was apprehended, the legal system wasted no time getting him behind bars. He was extradited from the U.S. to the Czech Republic on August 31, 2015, making him the first American ever to be sent there under such circumstances. A psychiatrist's testimony revealed that Dew Green was quiet when questioned by police, but he opened up to the psychiatrist, spending way more time with her than anyone else. She saw him as someone struggling with a mixed personality disorder. Before heading to Brno, he'd been thinking about going to Africa to kill poachers. He felt fine when he first got to Brno, but things changed when Martin kept pressuring him to find a meaningful job. The psychiatric evaluation suggested this was what sent him spiraling back to the same dark place he was in mentally while in the U.S. He spoke about an internal voice that told him what to do to become a hero, but the psychiatrist didn't buy the idea of psychosis. In fact, no one in a psychotic state could carry out murders like he did. It was a little too methodical. The case was an international spectacle, and the authorities weren't about to let Dew Green slip through any cracks. Once he was in Czech custody, psychiatric evaluations were conducted, and Dew Green was deemed sane and fit for trial. No last-minute play for an insanity defense was going to work here. The authorities knew Dew Green understood exactly what he was doing when he killed the Harok family. He was in full control, and that was a fact. The psychiatrist also mentioned how Dew Green seemed to see the Harok family as a source of his stress, while he was indifferent to everyone else. By March 21, 2016, the defense and prosecution were given the green light for a trial. There were no more delays, no more games. Justice was coming for him. By July 2016, Du Green's fate was tied to life in prison. The court handed him the harshest sentence they could. But Dahlgren wasn't about to accept that without a fight. He appealed, hoping the court might show some mercy or reconsider his sentence. But the court made it clear in March 2017 that there weren't going to be any second chances. The life sentence was final, and that was that. The case ran into a problem on January 11, 2018. Just a few years into his sentence, Du Green did something that honestly didn't surprise anyone who'd been following the case. He hung himself in his cell at Valdice prison. His death left a trail of unanswered questions, but it almost felt fitting for many close to the Harok family. The man who had ended 4 lives was now gone. After his suicide, attention turned to the prison guard on duty that night. Could the guard have done something to prevent it? Was there any negligence involved? Investigators looked into it, but after a thorough inquiry, they found no reason to press charges. The big question is why? Why did Dahlgren murder the Harok family? Despite countless opportunities, Du Green never spoke a word. He refused to testify, leaving everyone guessing about his true motives. Was it a mental breakdown, or was there something much darker at play? His troubled past hinted at deeper issues, but we'll never know for sure. Du Green didn't exactly have a history that screamed model citizen, and if you take a closer look, it's not hard to imagine how things could have spiraled into violence. His past was a mess, full of unresolved issues and red flags that could have easily led to something catastrophic. Mental health struggles were clearly a part of his story, though they were never diagnosed or treated properly. He dealt with problems that weren't addressed for years, and some argue that his instability played a huge role in what happened. Du Green refused to speak and committed suicide, keeping the truth to himself. His silence ensured the reasons behind his murder spree would remain a mystery. And that's the saddest part of the Harok family massacre. Was it a mental breakdown? Was it something else altogether? We would love to know your thoughts in the comments section. If you like the way we create these videos and want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.